They sold 55 million records. They crafted some of the most cinematic, layered, and otherworldly music the world had ever heard, and they did it all without ever touring. No concerts. No screaming crowds, no rock star chaos on the road. The Alan Parsons Project was built entirely inside a recording studio. Two men, a rotating cast of brilliant musicians, and a vision so meticulous it almost defied belief. But what happened when the music stopped? What happened when the partnership that created this legend quietly and bitterly fell apart? From a groundbreaking debut inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, to a mystery album locked in a vault for 35 years, to a split so painful it ended a friendship forever. The real story of the Alan Parsons Project goes far deeper than the records. And one chapter of this story ends in a way that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's go back to the beginning and find out where they all ended up. It was 1974. A young sound engineer named Alan Parsons was walking the corridors of the most famous recording studio on Earth, Abbey Road Studios in London. This wasn't his first rodeo. Parsons had already made his mark on music history in a way most engineers only dream of. He had worked on the Beatles' Abbey Road and Let Be, two of the most iconic records ever pressed. And then, just a year later, he sat behind the mixing desk for Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon, one of the best-selling albums of all time, engineered to a standard that still holds up today. But it was in those Abbey Road corridors where everything changed, because that's where Parsons met Eric Woolfson, a Scottish session pianist with an obsessive love for music and an ambitious dream he couldn't shake loose from his imagination. The two men connected immediately. Woolfson wasn't just a musician, he was a thinker, a storyteller, someone who wanted music to mean something, to build worlds, not just fill radio playlists. He had an idea that had been haunting him, a full concept album drawn from the dark, atmospheric short stories of Edgar Allan Poe, not a tribute album, not a cover project. A fully realized cinematic production where sound and atmosphere fused together to pull listeners into another dimension entirely. Parsons loved it. And just like that, the Alan Parsons Project was born in 1975. A studio project unlike anything the music industry had seen before. No lead singer, no fixed band, no tour dates. Just Parsons engineering and producing to near supernatural levels of perfection, and Woolfson writing, composing, and steering the creative vision. Around them, a rotating world of gifted session musicians filled the rest. But that's not the full story, because what they were really building was bigger than either of them understood at the time. Number 1, the album that started everything. In 1976, the Alan Parsons Project released their debut, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, a full-length concept record drawn from the writings of Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, The Telltale Heart, The Fall of the House of Usher, all reimagined in progressive rock and orchestral sound, wrapped in production that felt almost impossibly polished for a debut release. The quality was staggering. Parsons, fresh from the dark side of the moon, poured every technique he had mastered into this record. Every sound was deliberate, every moment of silence intentional. One track in particular made the whole industry sit up. The Raven, which featured actor Leonard Whiting on vocals and incorporated one of the earliest uses of a vocoder in rock music history. In 1976, this wasn't just unusual, it was extraordinary, futuristic, the kind of thing you didn't hear anywhere else. The album reached the US Billboard Top 40, a remarkable result for something so experimental and concept-driven. APP had originally signed with 20th Century Fox Records, but the debut's success changed the conversation fast. The bigger machine came calling, and Arista Records signed them, setting the stage for the commercial golden era that was about to unfold. What happened next shocked everyone, including the industry insiders who thought they already had this project figured out. Number 2, 1977. The sophomore album arrives, and it's even more ambitious than the debut. Inspired by the artificial intelligence and robotics concepts of science fiction legend Isaac Asimov, Parsons and Woolfson had conceived an album they wanted to call I, Robot, directly referencing Asimov's work. There was just one problem. The title rights were tangled. They couldn't get clearance. So they quietly adjusted, dropped the comma, and released it simply as I, Robot. Problem sidestepped. Legacy intact. The album introduced one of APP's most irresistible hooks. I Wouldn't Want to Be Like You, a funk-laced groove with an infectious chorus that became an international hit single and proved the project could write songs that grabbed you by the collar as well as songs that transported you somewhere else. And this was where the world truly met the rotating musical family that would define the APP sound for a decade. Singer Lenny Zakatek, one of the project's most recognizable voices, delivering performances of rare emotional power. Bassist David Payton, guitarist Ian Berenson, vocalist Chris Rainbow, and drummer Stuart Elliott forming the trusted inner circle that Parsons and Woolfson returned to again and again. None of them were officially in the band. There was no band. There was only the project, and the project was the idea. Then everything changed because the next two albums took them somewhere completely unexpected. Numbers 3 and 4 came quickly, almost relentlessly. Because when you're in that kind of creative flow, you don't stop. In 1978, APP released Pyramid, their most sonically exotic record yet. Inspired by ancient Egyptian mythology and architecture, the album felt genuinely timeless. Tracks like What Goes Up drifted between progressive rock grandeur and near-ambient atmosphere, pulling the listener into a sonic space that felt ancient and modern at once. Then came Eve in 1979, and this one surprised everyone who thought they had APP figured out. Instead of outer space or ancient civilizations, Woolfson turned the lens on something far more human: women, femininity, and society's complicated relationship with both. Lyrically, it was ahead of its time. Thematically, it was braver than anything in their catalog. The instrumental Lucifer from this period became one of the project's most hauntingly memorable pieces. Music so atmospheric it felt like the soundtrack to a film that didn't exist yet. By now, APP was a genuine phenomenon, massive in North America and continental Europe, and yet, strangely, almost inexplicably, they never achieved a single UK top 40 hit. Their own homeland remained somehow almost unmoved, a mystery that never fully resolved itself. And this is where things took a very strange turn. Because 1979 also produced something that would remain hidden from the world for decades. In 1979, Alan Parsons and Eric Woolfson recorded a complete album. It was called The Sicilian Defense, named after a famous chess opening. The music was written. The performances were recorded. The production was finished. It was a complete Alan Parsons Project album, ready to be heard. Arista Records refused to release it. The reasons were buried in contract negotiations and business disputes that neither side ever fully laid bare. But the result was stark and almost surreal. A finished APP album was locked away, shelved, hidden from the world, while the artist who made it moved on and kept working. For 35 years it sat in silence. While fans discovered AP's music, while new generations fell in love with Eye in the Sky and Games People Play, this album existed in the dark, unheard. It was only in 2014, decades after the project itself had ended, that The Sicilian Defense was finally given to the world. A ghost album. A piece of music history the public wasn't allowed to hear for a generation. What many people don't know is how deeply this episode damaged the relationship between Parsons, Woolfson, and Arista, and how much of that damage quietly bled into everything that followed. But before it all fell apart, they were about to create the music that would define them forever. Number 5. 1980, and this one hits differently. The Turn of a Friendly Card was a concept album about gambling, addiction, and fate, about the deeply human compulsion to chase hope even when the odds are stacked against you, to keep playing even when the hand is bad. It was Woolfson's most emotionally layered lyrical work to that point. From this record came Games People Play, arguably one of APP's signature songs. Smooth, hypnotic, sophisticated. A song that still sounds as immaculate today as it did in 1980, because the production is so controlled, so deliberate. That time simply hasn't touched it. And then there was Time. Eric Woolfson sang it himself, not hiding behind a session vocalist, not functioning as the invisible creative, but standing in front of the microphone, delivering something deeply personal. The song connected with listeners in a way that pure production craft alone can never manufacture. It had feeling, real feeling. Woolfson was more than a behind-the-scenes architect. He was an artist. And Time proved it beyond all argument. But how did they go from that to this? Because what came next was the single biggest moment of their entire career. We are not even halfway through, and the next story might be the most shocking of them all. Eye in the Sky, 1982, number 6. 1982, this is the one. Eye in the Sky became the Alan Parsons Project's biggest commercial album, the moment when everything they had spent 7 years building crystallized into something completely undeniable. The album opened with an instrumental called Sirius, barely over a minute long, pulsing, propulsive, atmospheric. A brief electronic introduction that felt like the countdown before something massive. Nobody could have predicted what Sirius would become. The Chicago Bulls used it as their player introduction music during the Michael Jordan era, one of the most iconic sporting moments in American broadcast history. Night after night, as the lights went down in the arena and the crowd noise built to something primal, Sirius played. It became synonymous with greatness itself, with anticipation, with the electric moment before glory arrives. Today, Sirius is one of the most recognizable pieces of instrumental music on Earth, heard at sporting events across the globe, recognized instantly by millions of people who may never have known the name Alan Parsons. Then the title track delivered the knockout. Eye in the Sky became a major Billboard hit, a song built on themes of surveillance, control, and the unnerving experience of being watched and known completely. The lyrics were ahead of their time. The production was, as always, flawless. APP was at the absolute peak of their powers. This was the summit. But behind the scenes, a very different story was beginning to unfold. Ammonia Avenue, 1984, Vulture Culture, 1985, Stereotomy, number 5, 7, 8, and 9 arrived in rapid succession, and each one quietly told a slightly different story about where this partnership was heading. Ammonia Avenue in 1984 produced Don't Answer Me, one of APP's final major U.S. hits. The song came with an innovative promotional video using comic book animation, a bold visual style that felt creative and very much of its moment. A last bright flash of mainstream chart attention. But behind the catchy hooks, the commercial landscape was shifting underneath them. Synth pop was taking over. The progressive, layered, orchestral world that APP had mastered was being edged out by something sleeker, simpler, and built for a shorter attention span. Vulture Culture arrived the same year, featuring Let's Talk About Me, a track with an almost sardonic self-awareness that felt like an artist examining his own reflection in a slightly uncomfortable mirror. Then Stereotomy followed, exploring themes of fame, psychological pressure, and fracturing identity. Deeper material, darker territory, more introspective than anything they had released before. APP was still making brilliant music, but the charts were less receptive, and in the background, the relationship between Parsons and Woolfson, always a partnership between two very different personalities with two very different visions, was beginning to show the strain. What many people don't know is how differently they each saw the future. Parsons was a producer, an engineer. He lived inside the studio. Woolfson was increasingly drawn toward musical theater, toward a world where music told its stories in a completely different way. The gap between those visions was growing wider with every passing year. And this next story is completely different from everything that came before. Gaudi, 1987, number 10, 1987. The last one. Gaudi was inspired by the legendary Spanish architect Antoni Gaudí, the genius behind Barcelona's extraordinary, organic, endlessly unfinished Sagrada Familia. A man who devoted his life to creating something so ambitious, so visionary, that it was still incomplete when he died, that someone else had to finish it. Whether the symbolism was intentional or not, it is almost impossible not to feel it now. The album produced Standing on Higher Ground, a song with a quiet dignity, a sense of hard-won perspective. It felt like a farewell, even though nobody said so directly. Gaudi was the final official studio album of the Alan Parsons Project's classic era. When the last note faded, so did the partnership. There was no dramatic announcement, no statement, no final tour. A project that had never toured was never going to end with one. It simply stopped. Behind the scenes, the cause was Freudiana, an ambitious theatrical project Woolfson wanted to build around the life and ideas of Sigmund Freud. Parsons couldn't fully share the enthusiasm. The creative divergence that had simmered beneath the surface for years had finally become too wide to bridge. Around 1990, Alan Parsons and Eric Woolfson split. The partnership that had lasted 15 years, produced 10 studio albums, and sold 55 million records ended quietly, without fanfare, without a proper goodbye, without resolution. And this is where things took the most painful turn of all. After the split, they moved in opposite directions, almost as though they couldn't bear to share the same musical space. Eric Woolfson threw himself into musical theater with complete commitment, channeling the storytelling instincts that had always been at his core into stage productions. He was finally doing what he had always truly wanted to do. The musician who had spent 15 years building other people's voices into something iconic was now building worlds of his own. In 2009, he released the Alan Parsons Project That Never Was, an album constructed from previously unreleased APP-era material, songs that had been waiting in the archive, musical ideas that had never found their right moment. Former APP musicians contributed to make it feel authentic and whole. It was, in every sense, a gift offered to the fans who had loved this music for decades. But behind the scenes, Woolfson was fighting something far more serious than a professional split or a creative disagreement. In December 2009, Eric Woolfson died from cancer. He was 64 years old. The Alan Parsons Project That Never Was in the most heartbreaking way imaginable, his final word, his goodbye. A collection of music made with the partner he had lost, given to the world just before he himself left it. He finished the album. He released it, and then he was gone. Alan Parsons built a different kind of second chapter, one that would have seemed almost unimaginable during the studio-bound APP years. Before APP, he had already demonstrated his production genius working with Al Stewart, Pilot, and Ambrosia. He had even been approached to work on Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here and turned it down, choosing instead to pour his energy into what would become the Alan Parsons Project, a decision that altered the course of music history. After the split, Parsons formed a touring band under his own name and began performing live internationally, bringing music that had never been heard in concert to audiences who had waited decades for exactly that experience. The engineer who built the studio creation finally stepped out from behind the desk. AP's catalog was reissued in expanded editions. The complete albums collection box set arrived in 2014, the same year the Sicilian Defense was finally given its freedom. The music kept finding new audiences. Films used it. Commercials used it. The Simpsons referenced APP. The Austin Powers films referenced APP. And in sports arenas around the world, whenever the lights dim and the moment before something great arrives, Sirius still plays. What started as two men in a corridor at Abbey Road, a sound engineer with an extraordinary ear and a session pianist with an extraordinary imagination, became one of the most singular creative partnerships in the history of recorded music. They never toured. They never chased trends. They built worlds instead of hit singles, even when the hit singles came anyway. They crafted music that felt larger than any single genre, progressive, orchestral, atmospheric, deeply and unmistakably human. And then they lost each other, not in a blaze of public drama, not in a lawsuit or a press conference or a screaming row that became tabloid fodder, just quietly. The way partnerships sometimes end when two people want different things, dream different dreams, and can no longer find the meeting point between them. 55 million records sold, 10 concept albums, songs that soundtrack the greatest moments in sporting history, a debut built on Edgar Allan Poe, a secret album hidden for 35 years, a final record released just before death. Some found new roads forward. Some left legacies that will never be fully measured, and one of them left a last album that was, without anyone planning it that way, a goodbye. Because in the end, the show may have been scripted, but everything that came after was real.